Welcome to Chapter 5. In this chapter, we are going to discuss corporate governance in greater detail. This is a subject that was introduced in Chapter 2. We will talk about the responsibilities of the Board of Directors and their major committees and identify an appropriate governance model for an organization. This quote is from Warren Buffett, who is an American business magnate, investor, and philanthropist. He is widely considered the most successful investor of the 20th century. He says, earnings can be as pliable as putty when a charlatan heads the company reporting them. His view is clear. Responsible earnings reporting can only occur if there is an ethical, responsible leader at the top. So what is corporate governance? As we said before, corporate governance is the system by which business corporations are directed and controlled. Managers are accountable to the owners of the business and to the public interest, which includes all of the stakeholders, from customers to suppliers, consumers, and communities. Corporate governance consists of all of these key players: owners, board of directors, and their auditing committee, compensation committee, and corporate governance committee. Here is a schematic showing the relationship of all of the key players. The board of directors is elected by the owners to represent their interests in running the corporation. Elections take place at an annual stockholders meeting. The audit committee is staffed by members of the board plus inside or outside directors. The main responsibility of the audit committee is to oversee the financial reporting process, monitor internal financial controls, monitor the choice of accounting policies and procedures, and oversee the hiring and performance of external auditors who prepare the corporation's financial statements. The compensation committee, also staffed by members of the board plus independent directors, oversees the compensation packages for senior executives. Compensation policies for lower-level employees of the corporation are left to the management team. The Corporate Governance Committee, staffed by board members and specialists, monitors the ethical performance of the corporation and oversees compliance with the company's code of ethics and any federal and state regulations on corporate conduct. Of course, the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and COO, Chief Operating Officer, report to the board. There are two governance methodologies or guidelines that a corporation can use to demonstrate compliance with ethical and legal standards. The first is comply or explain. This is a set of guidelines that requires companies to abide by a set of operating standards or explain why they chose not to. This is a very vague guideline since it does not really define acceptable explanations for noncompliance. Explanations could be buried in the footnotes to the annual report. Comply or else is much stronger. This is a set of guidelines that require companies to abide by a set of financial standards or face stiff financial penalties. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which we will talk about in Chapter 6, imposes stiff financial penalties for noncompliance. This is the or else part of comply or else. If the model of corporate structure is what we just described, and if it is followed, the stockholders elect members of the board, and then the board elects a chairperson. Unfortunately, many corporations around the world disregard this model. Many try to merge the role of the chief executive officer and the chairman of the board into one individual. Proponents would say that this gains efficiency and minimizes conflict. However, opponents would say that ethical governance needs a check and balance. If the CEO is chairman, he or she may slowly populate the board with friends who are willing to rubber stamp the CEO's policies. Then all checks and balances are eventually lost. To create effective governance, the board of directors should create a climate of trust and candor. They should work in partnership with senior executives. They should foster a culture of open dissent. Allow frank and open discussion on proposals. They should mix up their roles. Rotating board assignments can foster debate as members become more knowledgeable. Ensure individual accountability. As a board member, you should always avoid voting with the majority. Carefully scrutinize all issues and vote as you believe appropriate. Let the board assess leadership talent. Meet with future leaders to really understand their competency before they stand for election. Finally, evaluate the board's performance. Do a board self-evaluation to assure that everyone is demonstrating superior performance. Walter Salmon developed a list of 22 questions to assess the quality of a board of directors. First, are there 3 or more outside directors for every insider? Inside directors hold management positions in the company, whereas outside directors do not, but they may have some connection to the company, such as creditors, suppliers, customers, or professional consultants. Are the insiders limited to the CEO, the COO, and the CFO? And do your directors routinely speak to senior managers who are not represented on the board? Do your directors get an understanding of what is really going on in the company? Is your board the right size, 8 to 15 members? Too many is unmanageable. Too few results in not enough diversity. Number 5, does your audit committee, not management, have the authority to approve the partner in charge of auditing the company? This provides independent oversight. Does your audit committee routinely review high exposure areas? These are areas where there is a high risk of non-compliance. Do compensation consultants report to your compensation committee rather than to the company's human resource officers? Again, this provides independent oversight and input. Has your compensation committee shown the courage to establish formulas for CEO compensation based on long-term results, even if formulas differ from industry norms? Compensation should be based on the company's results, not on others, to ensure success. Are the activities of your executive committee sufficiently contained to prevent the emergence of a 2-tier board? The executive committee, usually the president, vice president, and secretary of the board, for example, usually meet to discuss sensitive issues. These issues should be clearly defined and limited so that the executive committee does not have too much decision power compared to the entire board. Do outside directors annually review succession plans for senior management? And do outside directors formally evaluate your CEO's strengths, weaknesses, objectives, personal plans, and performance every year? Both of these provide a check and balance to make sure that the corporate leadership is balanced and effective. Does your nominating committee, rather than the CEO, direct the search for new board members and invite candidates to stand for election? Again, to get independent outside new blood with fresh ideas onto the board. Is there a way for outside directors to alter the meeting agenda set by your CEO? Can they introduce topics that they are concerned about? Does the company help directors prepare for meetings by sending relevant routine information as well as analyses of key agenda items ahead of time? This ensures that meetings will be efficient and board members will be knowledgeable. Is there sufficient meeting time for thoughtful discussion in addition to management monologues? Don't let management dictate discussion. The board should weigh in on all issues brought to them. Do the outside directors meet without management on a regular basis so that they are not unduly influenced by management? Is your board actively involved in formulating long-range business strategy from the start of the planning cycle? That should be their role, to establish high-level definition and direction. Does your board, rather than the incumbent CEO, select the new chief executive in fact as well as in theory. Again, this assures the appropriate check and balance. Is at least some of the director's pay linked to corporate performance? Board members do receive compensation for their efforts. That compensation should be linked to corporate success. Is the performance of each of your directors periodically reviewed? Are directors who are no longer pulling their weight discouraged from standing for re-election, in other words, retire? And do you take the right measures to build trust among directors? Lots of questions, lots of guidelines, and Enron could answer yes to all of these questions. They separated the roles of the chairman, who was Kenneth Lay, and the chief executive officer, who was Jeffrey Skilling, at least until he resigned. They maintained a roster of independent directors with flawless resumes, and they maintained an audit committee consisting exclusively of non-executives. By the way, if you want to understand more about the Enron scandal, just Google Enron scandal, and you will find a ton of very insightful articles. Of course, if you dig deeper into what happened at Enron, you will find that many of the independent directors were affiliated with organizations that benefited directly from Enron's success. They also enjoyed substantial benefits that continued to grow as Enron's future grew. So they had incentive to look the other way. Also, their roles as directors of Enron guaranteed them positions as directors of other companies, a career package that would be placed in jeopardy if they became troublemakers. And again, every board they served on, they made money. So it was a great career. Now, fiduciary responsibility is the responsibility to safeguard and grow the owner's investments, and it is ultimately based on trust. While it is probably impossible to completely foolproof corporate ethical governance, there are key safeguards that will help. Properly constituted boards, separation of the functions of the board of chairperson and CEO, properly functioning audit committees, vigilant shareholders who will question the board, who they did originally elect, and sound financial reporting and auditing systems will all be safeguards that will help. So that's it for Chapter 5. Remember, if you have questions, you can contact me by email or post on our Questions, Issues, and Concerns discussion forum. I'll be back for Chapter 6.